At this time of year, veterans are remembered for their contributions to freedom. In Stratford, an artist is crafting his own memorial. He's produced over 40 paintings and drawings of the Royal Canadian Air Force in action during World War II. Art Beaumont has this report on the man and his work.
Rich Thistle describes himself as a peace-loving man. And while war is something he abhors, he admits to a fascination with the machines of war and with the men who fly them.
Partly the social phenomenon of war that I find interesting. How young men mostly can find themselves doing these things is quite incredible. Being a teacher, I come in contact with young people about the age of the boys who would have been going into the services in those times, and you often wonder whether or not today's lads could do that sort of thing. I suppose they could, but it's an interesting phenomenon, this whole idea of these young 17, 18. Some of them lied about their age, and I read the other day about a pilot of a Lancaster who was 19 years old. He was responsible for 6 other men at 19. And you're right, that's fascinating to think about, I think.
Thistle's father was in the Air Force in 1943, and he remembers drawing and reading about planes as a child. But the real spark came about a year and a half ago when he started reading a book about British aviation artist Robert Taylor. Until then, landscape was the major theme in his work, and while he still enjoys the creative freedom of landscapes, Thistle admits aviation art has filled a void, and it's something he says he'll never give up.
I've spent a long time searching for a possible subject that I can remain excited about, and if the last year and a half is any indication, I've done 40 works in the last year and a half, and I've got always 12 or so incubating and doing research on and finding flyers to talk to and so on. And that, I think, means to me that that's going to be my interest in the foreseeable future. One should never say never, but in the foreseeable future, that's my direction.
Thistle will continue his work for another reason, for the RCAF veterans. All his paintings are based on research and history recounted to him by men who served in World War II. He says if he were a writer, he'd use a pen. As a painter, his brush forms the tribute. For Sunday AM, I'm Art Beaumont.
Hi, I'm Bob Gallagher, and welcome to the Chamber Show. Tonight we're going to take a look at something a little bit different, and that is we have with us Rich Thistle and his wife Jay. Rich is an artist of World War II aircraft. Would that be fair to say? Yes, that's right. How did you get involved in World War II aircraft?
Well, it's a long story. I'll try not to make it too long, though. As a young boy, I was interested. My dad was RCAF during the war for a short period, and one of my youngest or earliest memories was going to air shows as a young lad with my mom and dad. And I had the average adolescent interest, I guess, when I was a teenager, and that's when I started drawing aircraft. But a couple of years ago, I read a book about Robert Taylor, who was a British aviation artist. And the whole thing, my early childhood sort of popped in front of me again. And I did my first painting.
What were you doing before that? What kind of art were you involved in?
Well, I'm still a landscape painter in watercolor, and I do both, actually. I spend about equal time in both areas.
And these are done in oil?
These, the aviation works are done either in acrylic or in watercolor and paper. I work in both media.
All right, how do you research this?
Well, I do a lot of reading, watch a lot of war films, some good, some bad. Most bad, but you get ideas from almost anything you watch, I guess. But I also do a lot of research with the people who flew and worked on these airplanes, because there are still many of them around.
Mm-hmm. So they're authentic as can be painted at this
I
point?
think you have to, in this kind of a field, you have to be as careful as you can. There are what are called rivet counters, I guess, out there who are waiting to pounce on you if you goof. But and I have made a couple of goofs, but I've learned to do my research carefully at the beginning. That's the important thing.
And the painting that you brought with you today has, what, 4 or 5 different aircraft in it.
Yeah,
You really have to do some serious studying on
you do. I paint some aircraft. I paint quite a bit. I've painted many Spitfires, for example, and each time you paint an aircraft, I think there's no better way of getting to know something than to paint it. So the more I paint them, the more facile, I guess, I become with it. But there's always a Spitfire isn't just a Spitfire. There were 40 variants of Spitfire, and each one has differences that you have to learn to recognize.
Do you come down and paint Robertson Spitfire here in Windsor then?
Well, I do a lot of my primary research at the Canadian Warplane Heritage in Mount Hope.
Right.
They have over 40 aircraft and several being rejuvenated. I've also been to Ottawa, but other than that, those are the 2 main places where I get personal contact with these airplanes.
Okay. And you're still doing your landscape as well?
Yes, I am.
Now, the reason you're here tonight is that you have a showing of your work coming up at the Bergeron Gallery?
Yes, we've been traveling around the country to promote, around the southern part of the province, I should say, to promote a poster that has been published, that I have published with Canadian Warplane Heritage, commemorative poster of the Battle of Britain. And we're promoting that by visiting galleries, and it also gives me a chance, though, to meet some people who are interested in this field of art and to meet more flyers. And it's just a great time to get around and meet people who are interested in what I'm interested in.
You've only been doing it for 2 years.
2 years, not quite 2 years. For my show in last November in London, I had 43 original works in that show. So I've been busy, and I enjoy the work.
Now, 43 paintings in less than 2 years.
Right.
How do you do that?
Well, I guess I like what I'm doing because I look forward to it during my working day, which is as a teacher and visual art consultant. And so I spend 3 or 4 hours a day when I'm working, which is most of the time, and maybe a full day on the weekend. So it's a busy life, but as I say, it's the part that keeps me going, I think.
All right. Now, Jay, you are the business manager.
I guess you could call me that.
How do you market an artist?
We started out by reproducing some of his paintings into limited edition prints, and I went through the art magazines looking for galleries that handle limited edition prints, and we sent off several packages in the mail of samples with information about Rich, and just waited to hear back from them. And we heard back from some, and then it spreads by word of mouth. You get in touch with more galleries, and they put you in touch with other galleries, and before you know it, you have a bunch of galleries handling your prints.
How many are you up to now?
Well, we're not sure now because we've handed it over to a distributor. So we only deal with 3 ourselves personally, but the distributor has taken over all of the rest. And I'm not sure at this point how many we have. And he's moving into Vancouver, and he's out east, and he's also moving into the States. So it changes daily.
As an artist, Rich, do you have problems with reproductions? What the difference between an original and a reproduction?
Well, I think I've always understood the difference. I think there are some people who don't, and it's possibly a sore point. I can remember at one time when I was only producing original works, having a certain opinion about reproduction and about limited editions and so on. We have made a promise to ourselves to keep the limited editions limited. I have a problem, a very large problem, with time-limited editions or so-called limited editions that end up being over 20,000. To me, that becomes a problem. Even
Windsor Star is limited to only 58,000 copies a day. Yes.
Even hand-signing those would be a monumental task, and I somehow can hardly believe that that editions like that are hand-signed. But anyhow, 350, 450 is our target, and basically I think we're going to stick with that. I think it's often the publishers who ask for more than that, or who, once you sign on with a publisher, see, we publish our own work, and so once you sign on with a publisher, I think you're open to the pressure from them.
How do you decide which ones you're going to do in reproductions?
Well, you could take a vote on, have
Market
a vote
survey.
from all the people that you know. Or we ask, we listen to gallery people who handle our work and say, they might say, well, they love this, but they're looking for Halifaxes instead of Lancasters or something like that. Now, it's hard to paint that way and say, okay, now I have to paint a Halifax. But if you're going to put something in reproduction, I think you're filling a niche of some sort, and if you don't fill it carefully, then your marketing strategy is going to be nil, basically. So I do listen to that sort of thing, but I pick an image that I think is strong, that has some appeal, that works as a painting, not just as an aircraft. So there are several criteria, I think.
And how many more are you going to be doing? Is this going to be a long-term project for you?
Well, I hope so. In the last 2 years, or less than 2 years, we've published 5 works, including the poster, and we know what needs to be published next. So it's a matter of, well, I keep thinking that we're in the development part, the investment part of all of this, because it takes quite a bit of capital outlay to publish, and so you can't publish one every week. No question of that. But
How often do you publish?
well, we've published, I'd say once every 4 months, or once 4 or 5 months. It's up to
Just
them.
let the bank account fill when it gets to a certain
That's
point.
right.
You
That's
go
right.
for it.
Yeah, it's just a little bell rings, and oh, it's time to publish.
Time to spend it.
Are you going to continue on with this 40 prints a year?
Well, I doubt if I will be able to keep up that rate of painting. However, it's something that I'm very, very interested in, and I seem to have a lot of energy toward that direction. So for the last few months I've been working on watercolor landscapes, but a couple of commissions and things it's swinging back. The pendulum is going the other way again, so I'll be working on aviation work again.
And you're looking forward to retirement, no doubt.
Well, I hate to...
That fell on the edge. I'm going to paint full time.
Yeah, right. I hate to count the years, but it's 12 years until I can retire, and by then I want to have a full-time career as an artist, and I think that's certainly what's going to happen.
What's your next move to market them? How are you going to get them into that retirement stage?
Get more galleries interested in handling the prints, and also selling the original work. That's important too. The more people that know about it, the better it is.
Do you just sell here in Ontario or in Canada, or is this you're looking?
So far just in Canada, but we're moving into the States and possibly into Europe. But that's up to the distributor too. So he has several irons in the fire, so to speak. Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for being with us. When is your opening? Or when is your exhibition?
March the 24th, Saturday.
Which is the day that the show is on the air.
Oh, is it?
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, today then.
Today.
At Bergeron Art and Frame on Wyandotte. It's I'll be there 1 to 4 to meet with people who are interested in this kind of art, and hopefully to sign some posters. And
Okay,
some
and
good contacts.
it'll be there. The posters will be available
Yes,
for a period of time.
they will.
He's our exclusive gallery here in Windsor. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming down from Stratford and being with us.
It's been a pleasure, Bob.
Okay.
Thank
We'll be back right after this.
Part of what I'm doing in aviation art, particularly focusing on World War II, is to tell the stories of flyers who accomplished great deeds.
and focus on the Canadian efforts during the war and make that more real and more important to people. I think aircraft are beautiful. As I paint aircraft, I think about how they were designed and how much effort and work went into each of them. One of the things that has led me in being interested in aircraft was having a father and an uncle who served in World War II in the Royal Canadian Air Force. I think I can remember becoming interested in aviation art as a boy. I think many teenagers have an interest in such things. And my first recollections of working with aircraft in my art were as a teenager, maybe 13 or 14. I think a painting has to speak for itself, but my own feelings about almost all of my paintings, I have this great joy of bringing something back, bringing something alive. I have to be careful because there are always people who know a great deal about aircraft, and I've heard other aviation artists call them rivet counters. Although I try to keep my work a little less technical perhaps and a little more painterly. So I don't usually worry myself even about counting rivets. But that's the kind of attention that aviation art will sometimes receive from people who are looking at it. And they may not hesitate to point out something if they find something that's incorrect. So there's always that pressure. It's not like a landscape painting where you can feel free and happy and do what you want and end up with a result that's, that comes from a process maybe of discovery as you go along. In aviation painting, it's a little more exacting. My research makes up, I think, one of the most important parts of what I enjoy about aviation art, and that is reading of history. I've always been interested in history. The type of aircraft you want to paint may not even exist. There are many types of aircraft which have sort of totally disappeared from history. Maybe they pushed them all off aircraft carriers after the war or something like that. And quite often it would be difficult to work from a specific aircraft. My main source of actual detail and material comes from books, books that represent the history of the war, and particularly the aviation history of the war. So I began to read intensively. And once my aviation painting began in 1988, I began to meet all sorts of people who were able to respond to my questions. And through these people, I met a very good friend who I think of him as sort of a pseudo-father now, because I'm missing my dad, I guess, in these circumstances. And he flew Spitfires and Mustangs during the war and hurricanes, and brought to me a sort of intimate knowledge of the times, and more than you can read in a book.
And flew long-range escort on bomber raids,
Right.
daylight bombing raids.
Those were the Ds then.
Yes.
Yeah. And that those replaced the Spitfire Mark 9 or something, didn't they?
Yes, the squadron left the continent and went back to England and converted onto Mustangs to finish off the war.
This picture of you sitting on the wing, that's a Mustang wing, isn't it?
Yes, that's one of our aircraft from the actually it was a raid on Swinmunda.
If you're going to represent historical facts, you have to make sure that you do the best you can. It will never be perfect, because the only way to know exactly what it was like was to be there and experience it. It's fun, for example, when pilots invite me to fly with them, although it doesn't happen a great deal. Many of the aircraft that are still flying are single-seat aircraft, and so you just have to sort of be close to them when they're flying and watch them being flown. But I would not turn down a chance to fly in any such aircraft. And for example, Harvard, I've had some experience in Harvard, and it's tremendously exciting. But all the time I'm trying to absorb the feeling of flying and listen to the patter that goes on. Okay. I try to be as close to these airplanes as possible, as often as possible.
Queen Returns represents the Halifax bomber. In this case, depicted returning in the early morning light. This is a B-52, a B-52D, which is Vietnam era. These Typhoons were used for tactical attack, supporting ground troops basically. And they usually carried 500-pound bombs under the wings, but this wasn't their favorite activity. Through my reading of the squadron history, I discovered that the motor transport would dash for the overpasses where they would maybe get some protection from the strafing. So I wanted to have an overpass in this painting on the Autobahn. Now when I'm doing my original drawing, which is usually the way a painting starts, I would start a painting by actually doing some drawing. I need to have the aircraft set in my own mind before I know how I want to present those aircraft. My goal is to make each painting work as a painting, not necessarily as simply a depiction of an aircraft. I am interested in depicting aircraft, certainly, and as accurately as I can, but my goal is to make images that work in their entirety, that present the aircraft in a meaningful and exciting environment as well. And so quite often, I have to research backgrounds, too. I love painting skies, too. That's certainly part of the advantage of painting aircraft, that you get to paint skies in broad backgrounds that have a lot of clouds. When Canadian aircraft were sent to the Gulf, I knew that this was the time when I had to make my first painting of current aircraft. And when our two F-18 pilots attacked an Iraqi gunboat in that now fairly famous Canadian event, that was the stimulus. And from that point on, I've had to divide my attentions, I think, between World War II vintage painting and painting of modern aircraft. We began with a very important painting that I painted early in my aviation career, and it depicts three Canadian Spitfires taking off from a temporary air base in France. It's called 442 Scramble Benny-sur-Mer, and in aviation reproduction, quite often an artist will have a pilot co-sign a work, and to my way of thinking, it tends to add a little bit of significance, but also it's a confirmation of the image. The pilot who flew the aircraft, when he signs the print with the artist, is saying, you know, this is the way it was. I remember it this way. So that's the way I look at it anyhow. It's very rewarding to me to see veterans who flew come to my gallery and to stand in front of my work. In fact, quite often, it's a very strong emotional response that they're having as well.
I have one on order. I've heard about it.
Yeah.
That's,
Was there a school in Montreal?
Well,
Or near
I don't think so, but there could be a navigation school.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a nav school down in...
I want to focus on the positive things. That's in a way why I rarely depict actual violence in my paintings. I usually want to depict action, but not necessarily with violence, although that's not always possible. I think some aviation artists might tend to focus a little more strongly on the actual violent part, the shooting of the cannons the fires and so on. And that does occur sometimes in my work, but I tend to want to have action without the depiction of violence necessarily. I think the word glorify is one that I have to combat. I do not glorify war. I have done enough reading and talked to enough people who are involved in war to know how horrific it is. But if you talk to these people, you will find out too that there were many positive things that happened to them during wartime. They never made such friends as they made during wartime, for example. So there's a lot behind my work, and all of this feeds back into my reaction in my painting. I want simply to depict it in an exciting and interesting way and hope that people react to it in positive ways, not only as history but also as art and painting.
This is CKCO TV's Sunday AM. Stratford artist Rich Thistle has quietly built up an international reputation as an aviation artist. Actually, Thistle has been painting for over 30 years, but it's only in the last decade or so that widespread recognition has come his way, the result of experience, attention to preparation and detail, and dedication to the subject. His finished paintings, especially the historical and wartime aircraft, have been widely shown and reproduced even on ceramics and plates. Jack Carpenter paid a visit to Rich Thistle recently in his Stratford studio and gallery.
It is intriguing when an artist's work goes from canvas to board, to prints, to medallions, even to plates. Rich Thistle, you've managed to accomplish that, and all with a love for aircraft.
Well, I've always, since I can remember, I've been interested in airplanes. I lived near a small rural airport when I was a kid. My dad was in the Air Force during the war, and my uncle. So it's sort of in the family, and recently I've decided to make it it's become a big passion in about 1989, I think, 1988. And since then, I just can't stop.
You like getting the detail of the aircraft, Rich, or do you like to make the aircraft part of a picture?
Well, I think I'm really interested in making my aviation work as a whole image, as a painting with a workable background and something that gives a feeling for a place or a time. And so the background is as important, I think, as the aircraft itself. But you have to paint accurately. There are always people who are going to look seriously at the image themselves and look at the details. So detailed work is certainly part of what I do.
There is a timeless reality to Rich Thistle's paintings, whether they reflect vintage aircraft that become a collectible poster or his striking Gulf War jet that became a front cover and a collector plate. I asked him how this extension of his work developed.
I was fortunate to be approached by a collectible plate company in London. Winston Rowland came to me several years ago and asked if I would be interested in doing aviation images for them, and I was. And since then, we've had a great time. We have, I think, 6 plates at the moment, and several in the plans. So,
the 50th anniversary commemorative medallions, that shows one of your Battle of Britain pictures. That must be a cornerstone to your career.
It's been a very exciting project. The Royal Canadian Mint phoned me last November, sort of out of the blue, and said, I hear you have a Canadian Battle of Britain painting. And I knew when I painted that in 1989 that it would be an important work, and it's been reproduced as a print and as a commemorative poster. And so from then, I was very excited to be involved in this project with 5 other prominent Canadian artists, and we have a 6-medallion set that commemorates the great commitment that Canadians had in World War II.
Thistle is a reserved man, somewhat shy, but to the delight of visitors to his Stratford gallery, they can talk to him and watch him paint. His aviation pictures are matched by his landscapes, whether in oil, acrylic, or watercolor. His collection of watercolors with their vibrant textures he refers to as his R&R paintings, the work that recharges his creative batteries.
Are you finding it difficult for an artist to be good in Canada? Do you have to go overseas to make your career even better?
I think international, being exposed to the international market is important, and that's part of what I'm doing at the moment. I'm working on a painting that is going to be reproduced by a large collectible and a firm in the States. And it's these kinds of projects, I think, that will help me. It's a slow process. There's no such thing as an overnight success. It's been years and years of hard work, but I think we're getting there. And things are happening, like the Mint project, which I think are, as you say, a sort of a cornerstone and a sort of building block. We think of all these things as a sort of stepping stone in the right direction.
As an artist, you're going to be working for the next 4 or 5 weeks on one particular painting, and that's going to occupy a fair amount of time. Where do you get the inspiration for the next one, or do you know what the next one's going to be?
Oh, I know what the next 50 or 60 are going to be. It's just a matter of finding time to paint them.
Do you find a recurring favorite?
Well, I have sentimental attachment to many aircraft, I think, and the current favorite is the one usually the one I'm painting. But I think the Spitfire is certainly one aircraft that I seem to come back to quite often, and there must be 6 or 8 paintings that are on the Spitfire theme, and it's a beautiful aircraft, sort of an aesthetic machine, and I do paint it a lot. I guess that's probably my favorite.
With his dedication and talent, Rich Thistle captures a moment in aviation history. Most likely they will be favorites for generations, as his pictures become as well known as the famous aircraft themselves. This is Jack Carpenter reporting.
Fashion these days, but not for one Stratford, Ontario artist. Rich Thistle is a very successful aviation artist. His paintings and prints commemorate the machines of Canada's Air Force. And in this, the 50th anniversary year of the end of the Second World War, he's expanded his work to remember the heroes from every branch of the armed forces who fought to preserve our freedom. Rich Thistle joins us now from his studio in Stratford, Ontario. Rich, with all of this talk about the Canadian Army, the military being under such scrutiny, and so much of it being so negative in the last little while, it must really affect someone like yourself who, like me, sees our military as heroes and sees the generosity and nobility of those who were involved in the Second World War, who fought on our behalf. It must really get you down sometimes to hear this negative
It's true,
talk.
Mike. It's very difficult, I think, for some of the men who were there to deal with this modern crisis in the military, but and with all the sort of spin doctor things that are happening to military history. But I do my part. I try to focus on the good aspects of what they did. I'm sure that each one of them could tell scary and frightening stories about what they had to go through, and many of them, of course, didn't return. But they gave a lot for their country, and that's part of what I'm doing as an aviation artist, is to focus on that.
Well, your work is just so breathtaking beautiful that it's hard for anyone not to see that you've captured that spirit of generosity and heroism and nobility that those people really exhibited. I think of you, when I see your work of your planes and so on, almost as a pointillist. The detail is so fine. I'm fascinated by that detail, and I guess you must be too. It shows in your work, at least, the way you've got every little thing
Well,
in
it's
place.
part of what I do. I like to make a painting that works as a whole image, that expresses some sort of feeling of place and time, and gives someone a sort of slice of reality. But, and part of that has to be, to keep it a painting, I'm a painter and I use paint, and it has to be painterly. But being an aviation artist, one has to deal with machines, and when you're dealing with machines, you have to deal with them accurately. I have to know what I'm painting and know about it very thoroughly, or someone is going to find out or not hesitate perhaps to tell me.
No, don't cross those vets. They'll let you know when you got it wrong. I get lots of mail about...
Yeah, well, there are a few rivet counters out there.
Right, well, that's okay. We love them anyway. Now, your paintings are so wonderful, but now you're also, I guess, the youngest artist to be selected on this medallion that's coming out to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Second World War. And that's got to be a real honor for you.
I was thrilled to be included in this project. I was called because I had a Canadian theme Battle of Britain painting that they wanted to use, and it's just been a great experience for me. Needless to say, traveling back and forth to Ottawa and being involved directly at the Mint and meeting some of the other artists who are still living. But it's great to be in that group, including Alex Colville and a number of other war artists, and I'm just thrilled and privileged to be a part of it.
Well, that's the way to do it, isn't it? And I guess with the 50th anniversary coming up, there'll be a lot more business, if I can talk about that, for you as people focus again on the end.
I'm looking forward to a new project coming up shortly, Mike, and it's sort of it's not concrete yet, but it's going to be, I hope to go over to Europe and be part of a Canadian representation there, and a painting may be donated to the country involved, and so it's an exciting time for me, and it's sort of a sad time in a way too, because these people who participated are reaching the end of their lives, and many of the people that I met at the beginning of my aviation art career are no longer here, so it's kind of sad at the same time.
Rich, no one could do a better job of representing the great things that they did and what they gave to all of us so generously than you have, sir, and it's a fitting tribute to those people who I love and admire and respect so very much. Thank you very much for showing us your work today. Congratulations on a great career, and let's hope that everybody who can takes advantages of an opportunity to have part of your art in their home, especially in this 50th anniversary year of the end of the war.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
It's been my pleasure and an honor.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
This is no ordinary occasion. Politicians and war veterans are at the Rich Thistle Art Gallery in Stratford as the wraps are taken off Thistle's latest masterpiece, Beacons of Liberty. Rich Thistle, an outstanding aviation artist, has a number of well-documented wartime paintings to his credit. With most of the Western world celebrating the 50th anniversary of VE Day, victory in Europe, and the end of hostilities in the European theater, Thistle's painting graphically illustrates the last and little-known operational flight of the RCAF 2 days after the war officially ended.
It's just beautiful, and it's so realistic, and it has the depth, and it just gives you a feeling of freedom.
Yes, it evokes a certain period I'd forgotten all about, really. But it's a very fine painting.
That has been very well captured by the artist, and you get the feeling that you're right there with them.
I get a feeling of pride in being a Canadian and being a part of what it's all about.
It's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. The island and the sight of those Canadian pilots flying their Mustangs over that outstanding landmark, the lighthouse.
These comments from civic leaders and ex-servicemen as they view the painting with one of the most recognizable landmarks in the island of Jersey and a flight of Canadian Air Force Mustangs. The occasion? The liberation of the Channel Islands after 5 years of German occupation. The Canadian participation Thistle first discovered in a conversation with Flying Officer Len Wilson.
I remember standing at the door and saying, "Len, I'm going to paint a picture about the Channel Islands." And he said, "Wait a minute." And he says, he went and got his logbook and he says, "I was there." So that was a fortuitous happening. And from that point, we did some further research. I had help from you, and I had help from from John Mallandane, another 442 pilot from British Columbia, who's sort of the, I guess, the unofficial historian of 442, and he sent some specific information about that particular day.
First, the events that led up to that day. The only British territory to be occupied by the Germans, the Channel Islands, are located in the English Channel, 100 miles from England and 12 miles off the coast of France. Sunday, 6th of May, 1945. End of the war imminent. 442 Squadron, very quiet. This is it. Nazis have surrendered, celebrating starts. Official VE Day will be tomorrow. Royal Navy destroyers dispatched to Channel Islands to take surrender of German garrison. VE Day, naturally, there's no flying. HMS Bulldog and Beagle arrive at the Channel Islands. The Germans do not surrender. They consider the naval ships an act of provocation. The British give the Germans an ultimatum and then move away. Royal Navy ships return. They request support. Surprise to everyone. 442 Squadron ordered into action. They will escort the naval force in liberation of the Channel Islands. 442 Squadron was an excellent choice for this mission. 12 combat-experienced pilots flying Mustangs with heavy firepower and the very necessary long-range capabilities. One of the 12 was Flying Officer Len Wilson of Stratford, who on this occasion was reunited with a mint-condition Mustang owned by Stratford resident Gary McCann. When you see the plane now, as your mind goes back to those days, this flew extremely well, didn't it?
It was almost the perfect airplane, yes. It had virtually no bad habits, except that you didn't drain your fuselage tank first, the one behind me here. It could get a little bit hairy in tight turns and landing if you didn't do that. So that was almost the first thing you did was get rid of the fuel in the fuselage tank.
Yes, yeah.
But otherwise than that, it was perfectly a predictable aircraft.
You, as a young man, flew Hurricanes, Spitfires, and the Mustang.
Yes, I had a very brief exposure to Hurricanes, but mostly I flew the Spitfire on operations. And this was just the tail end of the operations.
So now here we are on May the 9th. You got to scramble. You got to do on. So you were called out, and you're fully armed, and you had your long-range tanks on. How did you feel 2 days after the war that you were going into action?
Well, I don't think we thought much about it. It was just another trip.
Yes.
And we didn't think it was going to be very serious because the war was over. But we didn't know all the details behind the trip. We were just told we were going to fly to the Channel Islands and do top cover for a couple of destroyers who were taking over the islands.
You weren't aware that those islands were well fortified and there were 40,000 troops there?
No, we weren't. We had very little information about that.
Now, in hindsight, here 50 years later, how do you feel about an event like that, which is now, in the book, is quoted as being probably the official last sortie of the European theater?
Well, it's very rewarding to think that we did have the last operational trip of the war. I mean, that's a bit of a landmark, and especially to survive the last one, that's a plus.
Well, we know the facts. We know that the Channel Islands were held off by the Germans for one more day after the war. But, of course, we didn't know how Rich Thistle got into this until we discovered in his Stratford gallery you had already a painting of the 442 Squadron.
Right, 442 Squadron flew from D-Day right into Germany, so having a local person who flew in 442 Squadron helps a lot when you're wanting to do careful research. So Len Wilson has helped me. I like to paint things that will focus people's attention on Canada's contribution in the war.
You must have spent a considerable amount of time researching this to make it work.
I always do. Being an historical artist puts a little bit more pressure on you, I think, than maybe the other work that I do, which is landscape. It's something that requires exacting research. Sometimes I have to spend months and months looking for information.
How accurate is the painting? The pilot has the answer.
It's historically sound and very, very fine reproduction of the scene at the time. This aircraft is John Mallandane flying in Y2B. He's flying number 2 to the wing commander. And if you could look down below from above, you would see that he's slightly behind him. On the right of the wing commander is myself flying Y2W, and to my right is Rusty McCrae from Stellarton, Nova Scotia, and he would be flying number 2.
I think it's a unique story in the war. Here were the Canadian Air Force pilots flying cap over the island while the British took the surrender of the Germans. I pay tribute to this famous squadron and the quality of the pilots in that squadron. And when you look at this picture and you see those Mustangs flying in that formation and the beautiful lighthouse as they fly over this island, it brings back those kinds of memories of the war and the contribution that the Canadians paid in the liberation of Jersey.
I didn't even know that the Channel Islands were occupied until about 2 years ago when I visited Jersey.
And how do you feel about the occasion now? I can see there's a little pride in your eye.
There certainly is. You know, I'm excited about it, and like you say, it's. I think all Canadians can be proud of what we, you know, the role that we played in the war, and this one is certainly no exception.
Artist Rich Thistle wishes to donate the painting to the states of Jersey and profit from the limited edition print to support their new museum. Details are not yet complete, but it will be a fitting sequel to the 50th anniversary of Canadian service in World War II. This is Jack Carpenter reporting from Stratford.
Well, Rich Thistle's aviation art is certainly most realistic and impressive, and so is the other work he does as well, especially his watercolor landscapes.
Aviation.